When my husband came back after 3 months, wearing the same jacket he left in but a different kind of silence, I knew he was no longer mine. The day he disappeared, I was washing dishes. I still remember the sound of water running, the hum of the refrigerator, and how he called out from the doorway, "I'll be back in a few hours." His voice was calm, casual, the kind of tone a man uses when he's done it 1,000 times before. I didn't even turn around. I just said, "Okay, drive safe," while drying a glass with the same towel I used every morning. Those were the last words I said to him before he vanished. For weeks, I tried to convince myself it was something explainable, maybe an accident, maybe work trouble, maybe he just needed space. But space shouldn't last 91 days. When he finally returned, I expected answers. Instead, I got a stranger sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee from the mug I gave him on our 5th anniversary, the one that said, "You're my favorite headache." He smiled like nothing had happened. That was the worst part. "Hey," he said softly, as if the past 3 months had been a long weekend. "You look tired." I looked tired because I hadn't slept through the night in weeks. Because I'd called hospitals, filed police reports, searched through every bank transaction and phone log. Because I'd replayed every conversation we'd ever had, looking for clues in his tone, his eyes, the way his hand lingered too long on the car keys that morning. But I said nothing. I just nodded, poured him another cup of coffee, and sat across from him, waiting for a truth that never came. Before everything fell apart, our life was quiet, predictable. We lived in a modest, beige house with peeling paint on the back porch. He was a project manager for a construction firm, steady and patient, the kind of man people trusted with deadlines and blueprints. I was a part-time bookkeeper for a local bakery, always smelling like sugar and cinnamon. We had no children, not because we didn't want them, but because time and circumstance had decided otherwise. After years of trying and countless doctor visits, we'd accepted that our home would be just the two of us, and our laughter would echo off the walls a little too freely. He was gentle then, thoughtful in small ways, bringing me tea when my migraines hit, leaving notes on the counter with tiny sketches of hearts or bad jokes. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch after dinner, watching neighborhood kids ride bikes, talking about nothing important. That was before the phone calls. Before he started keeping his phone face down on the table. Before late-night messages and work emergencies became normal. Before silence settled between us like an uninvited guest that refused to leave. I remember the first time I noticed the shift. He came home late, smelling faintly of perfume I didn't wear. It wasn't obvious, not floral, not sweet. More like expensive soap, something crisp and foreign. When I asked if he'd been working late again, he didn't meet my eyes. "Yeah, long meeting." I wanted to believe him. I really did. The next morning, he made breakfast like always, scrambled eggs, toast too dark on one side, and coffee just the way I liked it. He kissed my cheek before leaving, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself I was imagining it all. But deep down, I knew something was unraveling. 3 months before he disappeared, we were distant but functional. Like two actors performing a play we'd rehearsed for years, but the script no longer made sense. We said goodnight without touching, smiled at jokes that weren't funny, and filled the silence with television shows neither of us watched. Then, one morning, he left. No note, no call. His clothes were gone, his phone switched off, his car missing. The police told me that adults have the right to leave if they want to, that no crime had been committed. But how could love just walk out the door and not look back? I spent those 91 days in a blur of waiting. I called his office, and they said he'd quit 2 days before. I visited his mother, but she claimed she hadn't heard from him. I searched our joint accounts, empty. I even drove to the motel where we'd stayed for our first anniversary, thinking maybe he was there. But the receptionist just shook her head kindly and handed me a tissue. Every night, I slept with my phone on my chest, waiting for it to ring. Every morning, I woke up and checked the driveway. Every evening, I told myself, if he's alive, he'll come home. And one day, he did. But the man who returned was not the one who left. He had a tan he never had before, a new watch on his wrist, and a kind of calm that didn't belong to someone who'd been missing. I asked, "Where have you been?" He hesitated. then smiled a small, almost pitiful smile. I needed time. Time for what? I whispered. To figure things out. Those words echoed in my mind for days, figure things out. What did he need to figure out that couldn't include me? That night, while he showered, I opened his bag. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, but desperation makes you cross lines you swore you wouldn't. Inside were 2 shirts, a passport, and a small envelope. Inside the envelope, a photograph. It was him, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. She was smiling, wearing a white dress. And his hand was on her waist like it belonged there. I remember the feeling, not like being punched, but like the air itself turned heavy, pressing down until I couldn't breathe. When he came out of the shower, I was sitting on the bed, the photograph in my lap. He froze. You got married, I said quietly. Didn't you? He didn't deny it. He didn't even look surprised. He just closed his eyes and said, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I stared at him, waiting for something, an explanation, a lie, a breakdown, anything that would make this make sense. But he just sat on the edge of the bed, water dripping from his hair, his breath uneven. Who is she? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He rubbed his temples like the truth was a migraine he didn't want to face. Her name's Lila, he finally said. We met when I was working on the new housing project in Cedar Falls. She was part of the client's team. I swallowed hard. You mean the project you told me was delayed? He nodded, still not looking at me. So while I was here filing missing person reports, while your mother cried and your friends searched, you were there. Getting married. He closed his eyes. It wasn't like that. I didn't plan it. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of his calm tone felt like a wound. You don't accidentally marry someone, Daniel. He flinched when I said his name. I thought you were dead, I whispered. I prayed for you. I begged God to bring you home. And you were walking down the aisle with another woman. He finally looked at me then. His eyes were red, tired, hollow. I made a mistake, he said softly. No, I said. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. This is destruction. He didn't argue. Just sat there, shoulders slumped, like a man already halfway buried in guilt. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to break that photograph into 1,000 pieces. But instead, I felt empty. Like every ounce of love I had for him had evaporated, leaving behind only silence. Why did you come back? I asked finally. He hesitated. Because I couldn't stop thinking about you. About us. Us. I repeated. You think there's still in us after this? He ran a hand through his hair, his voice breaking. She doesn't know. About you. About any of this. I stared at him in disbelief. You mean she thinks she's your first wife? He nodded. Something inside me snapped. All those months of fear, confusion, sleepless nights, replaced in an instant by pure, sharp fury. Do you even hear yourself, Daniel? You're living 2 lives. 2 women who think they know you. 2 homes. What kind of man does that? He didn't answer. Maybe he didn't have one. The next few days felt like walking through a fog. He stayed in the guest room, claiming he needed time to figure things out, as if that phrase hadn't already carved itself into my nightmares. I went through my days like a ghost, going to work, coming home, making dinner for one. Every sound reminded me of him. The creak of the floorboards, the smell of his cologne clinging to the couch. Even silence had his shape in it. But beneath the numbness, something else began to grow. A quiet determination. If he thought he could vanish, marry someone else, and come back as if nothing happened, he was wrong. I needed the truth, not his version, not half of it, the truth. One night, after he'd gone out for a drive, I opened his phone. I knew the passcode. He'd never changed it. There were no recent calls or messages. Everything was wiped clean. But in his photo gallery, he'd forgotten one thing. A folder synced from the cloud. Hidden, but not deleted. The images hit me like waves. Him and Lila in front of a courthouse. A gold ring on her hand. A small gathering, just a few people smiling. Him holding her face like it was the only thing that existed. My hands trembled as I scrolled. In one picture, I saw something that made my stomach twist, her belly, slightly rounded. Pregnant. That's when I understood. He hadn't just married her. He was starting a new family. I closed the phone, my breath shaking. When he came home, I was waiting in the kitchen. Is she pregnant? I asked. He froze in the doorway, keys still in his hand. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. You were going to leave me for her, weren't you? I didn't want to hurt you, he said weakly. I almost laughed again. You already did. He dropped the keys on the counter, leaned against the wall, and whispered, I didn't know how to choose. I stood up slowly. You don't get to choose anymore. You already did. That night, I packed his things. Every shirt, every sock, every reminder of the man I thought I knew. I placed them neatly by the door. He didn't try to stop me. When the morning light came through the curtains, he was gone again. But this time, I didn't wait. The following week, I met with a lawyer. The woman across from me wore glasses and spoke with the calm precision of someone who'd seen too many stories like mine. She listened quietly, took notes, and finally said, if he legally married someone else while still married to you, that's bigamy. It's a criminal offense. You have the right to press charges or file for annulment and financial damages. Her words felt like a life raft in a storm. For the first time in months, I had ground under my feet. But even as she spoke, part of me wasn't thinking about the legalities. I was thinking about that woman, Lila. Did she know? Did she think she was the only one? Did she believe in him the way I once did? I wondered if she, too, would wake up one day to find her life built on lies. That thought didn't bring comfort, just sadness. Because no matter what Daniel had done, there was still a time when I'd loved him completely. When I'd believed in the promise we made for better or worse. And now, standing in that lawyer's office, I realized worse had finally arrived. A week later, I got a message. Unknown number. Just one line. I think we need to talk. It was her. Lila. I stared at the message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. How did she get my number? What did she know? I typed a reply, erased it, typed again, erased again. Finally, I just wrote. Where? She sent an address, a small cafe downtown. Neutral ground. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes before walking in. She was already there, sitting by the window. I recognized her instantly, not from the photos, but from the way Daniel had looked at her in them. She was beautiful, yes, but not in the loud way. There was something gentle about her, something that made me understand, painfully, why he'd fallen. When she saw me, she stood. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, but not cruel. Thank you for coming, she said softly. I nodded and sat across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, two women connected by the same betrayal. Finally, she said, you're his wife. The words hit me like a knife. Yes, I said. His first wife. She looked down at her cup, her fingers trembling slightly. I thought so. I wasn't sure. Until recently. I waited. She took a shaky breath. Daniel and I got married 8 months ago. He told me he'd been married before, but that she'd left. That it ended badly. I believed him. Her voice cracked, and she blinked fast, trying not to cry. I didn't find out until last week. I saw a letter from your lawyer. The name matched his middle name, the same address he used for work. I confronted him, and he finally told me. I said nothing. I thought maybe you'd left him, she continued. But then he said you didn't even know. I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. He lied to both of us. She nodded, tears spilling now. I don't understand how someone can love two people and still destroy them both. I sighed. I used to think love made people better. Now I think it just shows who they really are. For a long time, we just sat there, two strangers bound by the same wound. Then she whispered, I'm pregnant. I froze. I didn't want you to find out from him, she said. But I also didn't want to keep pretending. I thought you deserved to know. The world tilted slightly. My chest ached, not from jealousy, but from the weight of finality. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about endings. I nodded slowly. It's not your fault, I said, surprising even myself. She looked up confused. He lied to both of us, I continued. You believed him because he made you believe him. That's what he does. Her face crumpled. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I won't let him do this again. To either of us. That night, Daniel showed up at my house again. He must have known we'd met. Maybe she told him. Maybe he just felt the ground shifting beneath him. He stood in the doorway like a man who didn't know where home was anymore. You talked to her, he said. Yes, I replied. He ran a hand over his face. I didn't want it to happen this way. I laughed bitterly. What way did you want it to happen, Daniel? Me and her living in separate bubbles while you played husband to both. He didn't answer. You ruined 2 lives, I said. Maybe 3, if that baby ever finds out what kind of man their father was. His voice broke. I love you both. Then you don't love either of us, I snapped. Because love doesn't look like this. He took a step toward me, desperate now. I can fix it. I'll leave her. I'll make it right. Don't, I said sharply. Don't do that to her. You've done enough. He froze, his face pale. So that's it? Yes, I said. That's it. He looked around the house one last time, as if memorizing the ghosts that would stay behind. Then he left quietly, without another word. And this time, I didn't cry. Weeks passed. The silence that followed was heavy but peaceful. I filed for divorce. Lila pressed charges. Through our lawyers, we learned the truth. He had falsified documents, manipulated timelines, even lied about his job transfers. He'd built a life of stories, each one crafted to keep us apart. The law moved slowly, but justice began to take shape. One evening, I got a call from Lila. Her voice was tired, but steady. He's in custody, she said, for fraud and bigamy. I closed my eyes. Good. She hesitated. I wanted to thank you. For what? For not hating me. You could have made this worse, but you didn't. I smiled sadly. We were both victims, Lila. Hate doesn't heal anything. There was a pause. Then she said softly, I hope you find peace. You too, I whispered. Months later, I stood by the window, watching the rain trace slow lines down the glass. The world felt different now, quieter, emptier, but also freer. I'd sold the house. I'd started over. Sometimes I still thought of him, not with love, but with the strange, distant ache you feel when remembering someone who died. Because in a way, he had. The man I loved was gone long before I found out the truth. And yet, somehow, I survived him. That night, I found an old photo tucked in one of my drawers, the 2 of us, years ago, laughing under a summer sky. I almost threw it away, but then I didn't. Not because I wanted to keep him, but because that photo reminded me of me, the woman who had loved fully, trusted deeply, and still managed to rebuild. That was the part worth saving. It's strange how silence becomes a companion once you've lived through enough noise. For months after the divorce was finalized, I didn't speak much. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I was tired of words that didn't mean what they should. The house was gone, sold to a young couple who smiled too easily and didn't see the ghosts that lingered in the walls. I moved into a smaller apartment, one with plain white walls, a balcony that overlooked a narrow street, and a kitchen just big enough for one. Every morning, I brewed coffee and watched people pass below. Sometimes I wondered how many of them carried their own quiet heartbreaks. You start to realize, after something like this, that pain doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just looks like someone standing still while everyone else keeps walking. But life, as it always does, found small ways to keep me moving. I went back to teaching at the community school. My students were mostly adults, women who had put off their education for families, work, or life. They came in tired, hopeful, nervous. I saw pieces of myself in each of them. One afternoon, after class, a student stayed behind. Her name was Amara. She was in her 40s, quiet but observant. She asked, "Do you ever feel like you lost years you'll never get back?" I looked at her, really looked, and said, "Every day. But sometimes losing years is how you learn to make the next ones matter." She smiled faintly, and I realized that maybe sharing my story didn't need to be a secret. Maybe it could mean something. One evening, while clearing out old folders on my laptop, I found a draft of a letter, one I had written to Daniel during those months when he was gone. It was full of worry, love, confusion. I'd never sent it. I reread it now and felt nothing but distance. Not hate, Not longing, just a quiet acceptance that some things end without closure, and that's okay. So, instead of deleting it, I opened a new document and began to write something different. Not to him, but to myself. It began. Dear me, you did not deserve to be lied to. You did not deserve to doubt your worth. You did not deserve to carry someone else's shame. I wrote for hours. The words poured out like a confession, but softer. It wasn't about revenge or regret. It was about release. When I finished, I printed the letter, folded it, and tucked it into a book on my nightstand, a promise that I'd never forget what I'd survived. A few months later, I heard from Lila again. She'd given birth to a baby girl. She sent a photo, tiny fingers wrapped around hers, soft light spilling through a hospital window. Beneath it, she wrote, I named her Hope. I stared at that word for a long time. Hope. It was such a simple thing. But in that moment, I realized she wasn't the only one who'd given birth to something new. I had too, not a child, but a life rebuilt from brokenness. We met once more, quietly, in that same cafe. The air between us felt lighter this time. She's beautiful, I said, smiling at the picture again. She's the reason I'm still standing, Lila replied. Then she's already doing her job, I said softly. We sat for a while, not as two women tied by betrayal anymore, but as two survivors who had finally made peace with the past. Before we parted, she said, Do you ever think you'll love again? I looked out the window and thought carefully. Maybe, but this time, I'll love myself first. She smiled. That's the best kind. Seasons changed. The ache dulled, then faded. I found new routines, new laughter. Some nights, I still caught myself listening for footsteps that would never come. But instead of pain, I felt gratitude for the quiet, for the lessons, for the woman I'd become. Because surviving betrayal doesn't mean forgetting it. It means learning to live without letting it define you. And I had finally done that. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, sharp, deliberate. Daniel's. I stood there for a long time before opening it. Inside, a short note. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I hope you're happy now. You were always better at being good than I was. No return address. Just his name. I folded it neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and slipped it into a drawer. Not to keep it out of love, but out of closure. It was his last word, and I decided it would stay that way. I whispered to the quiet room, I forgive you. But I'll never forget who I became because of you. And that, I realized, was enough. Years later, when people asked me about that chapter of my life, I didn't speak with bitterness. I spoke with gratitude. Because heartbreak didn't destroy me, it shaped me. It taught me that love without truth is just a performance. That trust, once broken, can still teach you where to place your faith next. And that endings, no matter how cruel, can still be the beginning of peace. Now, when I walk past couples holding hands, I don't feel envy. I feel hope not for them, but for myself. Because I know that love, the real kind, starts when you stop begging someone else to see your worth. The last time I visited the sea, the same one Daniel and I used to drive to on quiet weekends, I stood on the sand as the wind whipped my hair around my face. The water was cold, endless, alive. I took off my shoes and walked into the surf until the waves lapped at my knees. For a moment, I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, thank you for leaving. Because sometimes, the greatest gift someone gives you is the space they leave behind. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights blink like tiny beating hearts. Somewhere out there, Daniel was living with the consequences of his choices. Lila was raising her daughter. And I was finally free. Free of pretending. Free of waiting. Free of the version of myself that thought love had to hurt to be real. I wasn't the same woman who once begged for answers. I was stronger now. Softer too, but in a way that came from strength, not weakness. And in that quiet, I found peace. There are moments in life when the people we trust most become the reason we break. And when that happens, it feels like something inside us dies, the part that believed in forever, the part that thought love could fix everything. But sometimes, what feels like an ending is really the beginning of truth. When my husband disappeared, I thought I'd lost my world. But what I really lost was the illusion that I was loved by someone who deserved me. And that kind of loss, painful as it is, clears the path for something far more powerful: self-respect, peace, and quiet strength. If you've ever been betrayed, if someone you trusted shattered that fragile place inside you, I want you to remember this: you will not stay broken forever. One day, you'll wake up and realize the ache has softened. You'll breathe, and it won't hurt anymore. And you'll see that survival itself is a form of victory. Love doesn't always return to us in the same way we give it, but that doesn't mean it was wasted. It just means we were meant to love differently next time, wiser, calmer, without losing ourselves in the process. So wherever you are right now, if you're standing in the ruins of something that once felt like home, know this: you are not alone. You are not unlovable. You are not finished. You are simply becoming someone stronger. And maybe, just maybe, one day you'll look back, not with anger, not with regret, but with quiet gratitude for the storm that forced you to rebuild. Would you have forgiven him, or walked away like I did? Tell me in the comments. I'd like to know what your heart would have chosen.